Sermon Part 1, World History Has a Score. In 1986, my life was changed. My aunt took me to the cinema, and she took me to see Back to the Future. And I remember sitting there in the cinema. It was early in the film. And truthfully, I remember sitting there, I think I was a 6-year-old boy, watching this film and suddenly thinking, man, I thought that life was good, but I had no idea that life was this good. I was in awe and wonder at Back to the Future, such that every time we got out a video in those days, I'd always say, can we watch Back to the Future? Can we watch Back to the Future? Now, I want to talk about the score to Back to the Future. It's got a great score. If you've seen the film, it's got really two parts of it. The first part is the tension. Dun, dun, dun. And every time it gets that, you're in a scene of tension. Dun, 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 and then the tension changes key. Dun, dun, dun. Tension. And that appears each time there's like one of the big scenes. So when Libyan terrorists are chasing Marty McFly in the DeLorean, dun, dun, dun. When you've got the amazing skateboard scene and he's like holding onto the back of the car and people are throwing stuff at him, dun, dun, dun. When George McFly is about to punch Biff, dun, 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 and at the very end of the scene, this tension theme is running on. And the cool thing about the music of Back to the Future, as it goes along, the score kind of becomes more epic as you go along until you reach the finale, which is this clock tower scene when finally Marty McFly is going to go back to the future. But then you've got the resolution. So each time something good happens, the first time he travels in time, the moment he is on the skateboard scene and he escapes from Biff and the bullies and jumps over the car, you've got the dun, 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 dun. Resolution. And the resolution gets bigger each time as the story goes along. Tension, resolution. And so the score of Back to the Future really works with the film, and you get these repeated musical themes. The great thing about the resolution, though, is it's only ever resolves in part. Dun, 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 dun. It's like it resolves, it gets happy to a point. Dun, 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 dun. Is it finished? There's always a little bit more left, isn't it? And part of the genius, I think, about that score is that it's resolution, but it's not quite complete. And so when that music, that partial resolution comes in at the end of Back to the Future when suddenly they travel through time and it's like the story's not over yet. So you've got this theme of tension, resolution, or at least partial resolution. And I want to say that the book of Daniel is giving world history a theme tune. It's giving it a score. And you get these kind of like musical riffs or musical themes with tension and resolution that keep on repeating themselves. So if you think back to chapter 1 to 6, what have you got? You've got Babylon and the kings of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, followed by Darius the Mede and the Medo-Persian kingdom. And what do you get? History repeating itself. And the nature of history is these kingdoms rise up, they're powerful, God's people face unjust laws, they're commanded to worship rulers, they don't. And each time there's this theme of the kingdoms in rebellion against God. And yet each time there is some partial resolution. Either the kingdoms are brought to an end or the kingdoms change, they're brought into humility under God. And then it's never quite over yet. And there's always this extra theme about the Messiah, the stone that's going to come, that's not cut by human hands, the Son of Man who's going to come on the clouds of heaven. So you've got this extra theme of the Messiah. And so we're going to do chapter 8 in a minute. Okay, chapter 8 in 1 minute, and then we're going to get to chapter 9. I'm keen to kind of complete the book over the next couple of weeks. What happens in chapter 8? You get two kind of animals. Last week we looked at this kind of final beast with the horns, this kingdom that stands up against God that's eventually overthrown. And then chapter 8 jumps back a little bit in the timeline. I've got a timeline here. You've got Babylon, the Medo-Persian kingdom, the Greek kingdom, the Romans, and the end. And chapter 8 deals with the transfer from the Medo-Persians, and they've got this picture of like a ram that's really powerful, and then the Greek kingdom, which is like a goat. The goat kind of rams the ram and takes over. And you get this large horn, and people reckon that's probably Alexander the Great, who had a rapidly expanding kingdom, incredibly fast. And Alexander the Great died at the age of 32 with this immense kingdom. And then after Alexander the Great, a bit of time after, you get this leader called Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And Antiochus really stands against God's people. So he's here in this Greek kingdom. So we're before the end, and you've got this recurring theme. And what happens with Antiochus Epiphanes? He does everything that Nebuchadnezzar and Darius have done. He just repeats history. He repeats the score. What does he do? Firstly, he sets himself up as a god. Even the Greek people think he's kind of a bit crazy doing this thing. He sets himself up as a god. He wants worship. He is against the Jewish people. He does not like the Jews because they will worship God alone. And then he brings out a persecution on the Jews. He ends up doing these things with the temple. He closes the temple. He bans sacrifice. The Jews can no longer practice their religion. He takes the articles of the temple, like Belshazzar, the goblets, and he does his rituals with them. So history repeats itself in that. But then he takes it even further. He worships, he gets pigs. Pigs are sacrificed on the altar. I mean, if you can think of anything more abominable from a Jewish perspective, it's the sacrifice of pigs, but he does it. And then finally, he rededicates the temple to Zeus, to the Greek god Zeus. So what's going on? It's history repeating itself. The theme occurs again, and all of this is described in chapter 8. And we hear at the end of chapter 8 that he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes, yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. And so we have the same themes as last week. These kingdoms come, they take their stand against God's people. Why is God revealing this? To persevere, to know the story, to know the end of the story, to know these kingdoms will come an end, to know that they will come under the judgment of God, and yet to persevere. Now, this leads us to chapter 9, and we're going to deal with that in part 2 of this sermon in a moment, where you're about to hear the reading. A key theme in chapter 8 is that truth gets trampled down. 8:12. Because of the rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it, to this kingdom, this army that takes away the sacrifice. And this king and with the kingdom prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. We've got the problem of truth. History from the perspective of truth, and truth is just dismantled. And we've seen that theme in history occurring again. We saw it in the period of the Second World War. We've seen it with atheistic dictators that defy God, set themselves up against God and God's people, and commit all sorts of atrocities. And we see it with world leaders today who have a complete disregard for truth. Truth is thrown to the ground. So chapter 9, Daniel's still in exile. He's heard this prophecy from Jeremiah that after 70 years they're going to return. The 70 years is approaching. he engages in a full-on time of prayer with God and says, God, when are we going to go back? What's going to happen? He's concerned about the return of his people to his homeland, and yet in this chapter, God not only answers his question but points to how he's going to complete his purposes for all of world history. So let's pause. We're going to hear the reading, then we're going to pray, and we're going to look at chapter 9.